note to this, I'm talking about the COVID crisis. So a couple of months ago, the urban workforce that left the cities when everyone was asked to stay at home was a shocking experience. So that those people, a huge share of the Indian society, is not considering the city that they are working and living in as their home, was recognized worldwide, I would say. It was even in the news here in Germany. And, you know, considering the new urban agenda with the bold claim cities should leave no one behind, giving home to its citizens, there's obviously a bold contradiction. So we have seen what happens when people live and work in the cities without having a real home there. So they are in, but they are out at the same time. And in times of crisis, it becomes pretty obvious. And I would like, allow me please to add that this problem is not a unique problem for India. We have similar discussions on a different scale and under different, you know, in a different way. Also in Germany, that cities become simply too expensive for you know, a big share of the society, and cities are therefore no longer inclusive. They exclude big parts of society, and it's obviously a challenge worldwide to ensure that everyone is able to have its home in the city. So it is about affordable and adequate housing, about better opportunities, better rules. Although, you know, looking from outside, I was wondering yesterday in an internal discussion, obviously there are rules to, you know, for example, to register your lease contracts. And there are, you know, it is possible to rent a home in India in an urban setup. So is it just an enforcement issue that this is not done? Of course not. The answer is no, as the devil is in the details. And I understand that this lab specifically, you know, discusses these internal details of the processes. So we are focusing on the supply side. We have public supply, the formal private supply, and the informally operating private. We have to recognize and understand the local economy, and we would like to foster the discussion among the experts with this platform. Of course, we have two concepts of housing, providing housing for the urban population, which is ownership versus rent. And the focus in this discussion is very often skewed as it's only considering ownership as a possibility. But rent is very often the more common mode on the ground. So how do we include the private economy to become more formal? How do we trigger the private economy to really pitch in, to offer more? And how do we create also incentives for the private economy to be an important player in this? So we see that today, especially among the urban poor, there is a huge deficit in housing. It's about 95% of the urban poor. And we understand also that as of now, it's not really interesting for the private economy to interact in this segment of, you know, the local economy financially. So triggering this market with public interventions would really be the need of the hour. And last but not least, using also spatial planning tools that focus on good public infrastructure to sort of as a parallel stream to support all this. So let's take a look at our today's agenda. First, Ms. Aparna Das will talk about rental housing framework in India. Then we have the keynote address by Dr. K. Rao, IAS, Niti Aayog. Then the first session is moderated by Rebecca Ochong, where we have 4 speakers, Claire Dutrevoux, Osman Asmal, Banashri Banerjee, and Vidi Garg. with a Q&A at the end. And the second panel with the academia and sector experts will be moderated by Ms. Aparna Das, with the panelists Mr. Correa, Lino Segal, Yang Sang, Husu Li, Danilo Berlos Tenebro, Rushil Palavijala, and of course also with the Q&A. And the closing remarks will be done by Mr. Shubhgato Dasgupta. I wish us all a very interesting interaction and discussion. And with this, I'm done, and over to you, Aparna, please.
Thanks, Georg. Thanks everyone for making time here. And I also believe that it's going to be a very interesting discussion, because as we started our conversation, informal conversation, that we are trying to redefine something. So it is not that we are starting something very new or from the scratch, but we are trying to redefine. And that's a very interesting exercise, I must say, because we already have a framework condition that exists. On behalf of this collaborative effort, you can see a lot of institutions here, almost 8 or 9. I welcome Dr. Rao with us. And I know that you had some difficulties in connecting, but I think that those things are resolved now. So please be with us. And so what I am going to be doing is that I thought it would be good for us to share a small study that we did in GIZ in 2018. I'm just sharing that presentation. Just give me a moment, please. Um, I would browse through it very quickly. And this is a study that we did under one of our project called Inclusive Cities Partnership Program. And this has been a again, a work done by me, Arpan, Anandita, and many others who are not there right now. But so this is again a group work. I am having the privilege of presenting it.
Aparna, you might have to share the screen again.
We can't see the presentation. You have to reshare the presentation. We see the folder.
Oh, okay. So what I do the
Stop sharing and then go to that presentation and share again.
Just 1 second. Sorry. Is it coming now? Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm just trying to put it into the presentation mode. Just let me know if it works. Does it work?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so when we started this work, one first realization was that, it's not much known about this private people who are renting out their small units. So this is not captured in any data or any kind of official statistics. But what we figured out that almost 70% of the rental arrangements are happening in informal manner. So the bulk is supplied by this informal operators who are operating in a small way. So they don't make say a building block as such, but they rent out a part of their house, small room, and that's the way they operate. So it's difficult to capture them, but they are one of the major suppliers of affordable rental housing for the poor. So our study is based in 4 cities, in Behrampur and Puri in Orissa, and in Chennai and Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. This is just a basic profile of these 4 cities, and you can see that the cities can be as big as Chennai and as small as Puri. So, so we took this sample because that is a place where we were working at that time. So, when me and Georg talk to each other and we go on talking about it's a matter of enforcement or not, what I wanted to also, emphasize on that, 97%, like almost, like barring 3%, there is actually no written agreements or contractual agreement that one has when these rental transactions are happening. So you are talking about 97% informal arrangements, and that we are trying to formalize. So we need to also figure it out, whether we are trying to be conceptualizing this formal and informal in binary, or we have to figure out, whether if something is there 97%, how do we institutionalize it, or how do we bring in some kind of a regulatory framework if it is required. So these are the figures, like, in Chennai and Coimbatore, it is 98%. In in our sample, it says in Behrampur and Puri is 97%. And if you go into the details of, that 3%, how much is notarized and how much is not notarized, is also again, I think this doesn't really matter as such. The monthly rent that is being paid is, what we found in Behrampur and Puri, is less than 2,000, and in Chennai and Coimbatore was less than 3,000. So that's the kind of a rent that they are operating on. That's the kind of a market that we are talking about. Most of them are basically casual laborers. And what we saw during the pandemic, this exodus of people who are walking back to their own hometowns, are basically not so much anchored with the city as such. It is a job place for them. And I think that is what is this 68% of Behrampur people being in the rent are casual laborers. I think there is a link there, and I think that we need to also further firm up that who are the people who are living on renters, and what kind of a job that they do. Um, I think this is also another thing that we figure it out, that what kind of market are we talking about. We are talking about people who are paying, say, less than 2,000 and less than 3,000, but these are the people who are also living in 150 square feet or 15 square meters in Behrampur and Puri, and less than around 30 square meters in uh, Chennai and Coimbatore. And they are living on one room set, and that one room set may not be also conforming to the national building codes. The room may not be fulfilling all the criterias of the habitable room. So I think there is a bit of a work that needs to be done on this. Um, we always thought about this, when we were doing it, the study, one of the idea was to also meet the universal access to basic services. That's a goal. Now, what we figure it out that in Behrampur, in Puri, actually, like Puri had a better slum infrastructure, but Behrampur had only 60% um, people having access to toilet. And I think this is another part, that until unless we take care of the toilet facilities of renters, I think the universal access to the services cannot be met. And the similar is for the water supply. And if you see that in Chennai, it is only 1% of people who have access to piped water supply, which is quite alarming. Um, this is also another thing, that how expensive our cities are, that even when you are paying around 6,000 rupees as a rent, you are not really having a surety that you would have an access to piped water, household level, and also the access to the toilet. So it is not assuring you. uh, Especially, like, in Orissa, we were really kind of, it was quite a revelation that even after paying 4,000, you are not having an access to the toilet. And there's another side of the story, is that people were actually paying more than 4,000 for toilet. And this is also something that we can look into a bit more deep into it. When we did the study in Puri and Behrampur, we actually didn't look at the supply side. We were more obsessed with the demand side. But when we learned it, and when we did it in the Chennai and Coimbatore, what we found is that the landlord is equally poor often, who is supplying this supply, like this housing units. So that's what it is. Like in Chennai, you find more landlords staying with the tenants, like they are within the same premises, whereas maybe in Coimbatore it is not the same. So I think there has to be a lot of work done on who are the people who are supplying for it. I think that is a gap that we need to fill in through research and through more knowledge sharing on that. Um, what we find that the affordable rental housing complexes is a fantastic opportunity. It has two potential things that we can do it. One is that we can redefine and bring in more private players, and not only restrict to the people who are only operating in the formal, but others also bring in into the ambit of it, and give them encouragement so that they can keep on supplying for this particular sector, with some regulations, with some construction quality. So that would be one big achievement that we can do. And the second thing that we can do is that we can link this up with the spatial planning tools and use zoning rules to declare certain areas where this kind of supply can be sustained, can be encouraged. I think spatial planning paradigm and the rental housing are right now in India are two different tracks. They are not intersecting anywhere, and it is possible for us to create some synergies there. So this is what we thought would I would suggest, that could be possible for us to take it forward, is to recognize that there is a potential in this local market, and how do we encourage that market. And then second is to connect with sanitation or the in situ services, so that we are not doing this thing in isolation. And also we would see it in our discussions and in our presentations. It is possible to bring in some technologies to figure out how do we innovate in this. So with this, I stop here my presentation, and I would welcome Dr. Rao for his keynote address. Um, so I would like to, call him on. I'm not able to see your. Yeah, let me just stop it here. Yeah. So this is, we can take the questions later on maybe, but I would like to invite Dr. Rao for his keynote address. Dr. Rao is Additional Secretary at Niti Aayog. And may I request him to please come on? Yeah, come live. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Aparna, and good afternoon, friends. A very warm welcome to you all for this policy lab. Project manager Georg Johnson and Shubhagato and colleagues from World Bank, ADB, and also my colleagues from Kerala, DDA, and other colleagues from the NGOs and organizations, and all the invitees. It is a pleasure to take part in this policy lab. And Aparna, you have made this presentation, but I could see only perhaps two limitations. The sample size is only 4,000, and it was done in 2017-18, and also maybe in two cities in Tamil Nadu, two cities in Odisha. Perhaps maybe 2021 situation and scenario is little different in the various urban. So I suggest that maybe one more study may be launched with a little bigger sample, so that those findings, those feedbacks can also would be useful for the policy inputs to the ministry and also to the Niti Aayog. Friends, housing is not a simple brick and mortar story or a money issue, because it has a lot of social, cultural, gender, and also a lot of other complexities in cities and towns. And there is a very famous Telugu saying which says that illu katti chudu, pelli chesi chudu. It says that one gets complete experience, a lifetime experience, when one constructs a house or performs a marriage, that gives a lot of an opportunity for a family, for an individual to understand how complex or how challenging is to construct a house in urban and rural areas. But this policy lab is very timely because government responded to the with the ARHC scheme under PMAY because of the challenges posed by the COVID, migration and issues, which is, I think, a good beginning to help or to address the needs of the urban poor and also the very needy people. So AHRC now at this present focus on the repurposing the vacant houses and also encouraging the private entities to engage in the supply of such properties, which is a very revolutionary and a very big and a new beginning, because we all have been in the urban sector for last 15-20 years. So it is a very impressive beginning. And there is an opportunity, there is a possibility to widen the scheme, to deepen the implementation catalogs, implementation stakeholders, and the methodologies. So basically, we are all aware that there is a local rental markets. There are local private individuals who mostly dominate this, and there are a lot of informal understandings among these people, and there are no institutional or regulated what you call the grievance redressal mechanisms in this sector. But still, the life is going on, and people are having their own rental accommodations in this field. That's why I think there is a lot of need to, I think, expand our knowledge and also maybe launch more and more studies, so that all these will be very useful for making the public policy. Friends, this housing is not a new issue, because Government of India has launched these schemes in several forms in the rural and urban areas earlier also. But because the government has realized that housing and economic growth are closely interrelated, because it boosts the primary sector, manufacturing sector, and also takes care of the most important need of our workforce. So the housing policies traditionally are perhaps advantageous to the ownership oriented, because not much care was done towards the people who are renting it out. And also these segments where mostly one-room tenements are there, which the study also reveals the challenges of accessing the urban basic services and also other facilities, is I think, a challenge which perhaps is being addressed with the PMAY, Amrut, and also the smart cities approach. So it is a very multi-pronged approach of the Government of India, and this year and next year are very critical in perhaps strengthening these approaches of the Government of India. Because this Atmanirbhar Bharat, particularly where the focus is on the migrant workers, so this rental housing initiative of the Ministry of Urban Affairs perhaps will be picked up, perhaps where the private sector will play very dominant role or very important role. And there is a reverse migration also now, and that is what the study and statistics revealed. More than 100 districts, there is a reverse migration from urban areas to the rural areas. So perhaps these rental housing needs will catch up, maybe in the rural areas also, if the situation continues. And there is also a draft model tenancy act also, which is being attempted by the Mahua, and which can be also being adopted by the respective state governments. So there are many factors associated with this informal rental housing, dealing with the access to livelihoods, costs of living, costs of traveling, social networks, and also the access to the land tenures and finance also. So the expanding the definitions of private and formalization of the informal housing market, as suggested in the note of this lab, may need perhaps further deliberations or and also evidence-based sessions for the ministry, so that some policy inputs can come for taking certain important decisions. And the idea of using technology to bring the subsistence landlords and aspiring tenants on a trustworthy, transparent platform may be helpful. However, more deliberations on its modalities are welcome for discussion with the Niti Aayog. We also welcome any suggestions that can help the startups, which are very potential in the sector, to contribute towards better housing and also better services in India. And with creative minds and private sector participation, that we can together accomplish the housing goals in India. And also India is signatory to the sustainable development goals, where housing also an important segment. So the today's discussions and thoughts on accelerating the economic growth of the country through catalyzing urban rental housing market, particularly for ensuring decent living to the urban migrants in India, is an interesting one. I'm very happy to understand what are the learnings, what are the thoughts, what are the ideas, and we can continue this dialogue and we can have further deliberations, so that we all can work towards that objective of better access to the housing and also better services. I thank the organizers, GIZ and other colleagues for giving this opportunity. And I'm sure that these deliberations will be very useful and very purposeful also. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your encouragement. And yes, we do need to do further work on it, because this is one other gap that we have identified, that, not much has been done. So it is difficult to touch this particular segment, it's because it's not, it's kind of not really kind of, tangible. So, but there are efforts done by many researchers and also practitioners who are doing small studies here and there. And I think it's time now for us to aggregate it and figure out it in a much more comprehensive manner, from the market angle, from the planning angle, from the need, what exactly, who is supplying, and what are the incentives that we can do. I think these are all matter of consideration. And I think GIZ and also this entire collaboration, we would be very happy to contribute in this, and we would be very happy to take this forward. With this note, I really thank you, and I would be like, I think we request you to be at least see few presentations, and we would have loved to be, if you would have been part of this panel discussion, but I know that your time is very limited. With this request, I would then hand it over to Rebecca, Rebecca Ochung, who is from Habitat for Humanity. Rebecca, would you please take over the further proceedings?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aparna. Thank you. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone from wherever you're joining from. And thank you for the introduction, Aparna. Just a brief introduction. My name is Rebecca Ochong. I'm Senior Manager Operations at Habitat for Humanity. And it's a pleasure for me to join this session today. And I will be moderating this next session, where we will be looking at international experiences from Jordan, from South Africa, and from India as well, as well as Colombia. And in this session, the panelists will share experiences on rental housing that are provided for the migrant or urban poor by the private entities that operate informally. And I think from Aparna's presentation earlier, I think she already helped to set that kind of context, and also from Dr. Rao, looking at how all this fits in within the Indian government's interventions, whether it is the PMAY or the ARHC, that really is coming in to try and see how the rental housing options, especially made as inclusive as possible. And I think it's good to hear that it's good to have Dr. Rao also here, just to also recognize the importance of already opening conversations in this area of how can we expand what we mean by private in the Indian context. So we really hope that everyone else will continue to join us as we learn from other cases from different parts of the world. So we will start with our first speakers. I'm not sure if Osman was able to join, but I know we have already Claire with us. So I will briefly introduce the two. I'm hoping that they'll be able to join. They will be presenting a case study of backyard rentals in South Africa. Claire, who is one of the presenters, Claire Dutravu, she's the director of BidProp, a social enterprise in South Africa that seeks to address housing shortages. And they do this by using a very unique funding model that allows private investors to invest in backyard rental, micro rental, while Osman is the executive director for spatial planning and environment within the city of Cape Town. So let me welcome both speakers to share with us. After the session, we will have 3 presentations. This will be the first one. Then after that, we'll have Q&A. So please feel free to share any comments or Q&A either on the Q&A tab or in the chat box. So let me hand over to our first speakers, Claire and Osman. Over to you.
Hi. I don't think Osman has joined us yet. My name is Claire Dutreva. I am a director at BidProp, and like Rebecca said, we seek to address backyard rental housing through an innovative funding model. I am going to share my screen. Can everybody see that and hear me?
Yes, yes, Claire.
Yes.
So this is one of BidProp's developments. This is our latest one. We finished it in August this year, just after lockdown. The 8 rental units in this, and this type of development, you can see the building that is blue is the development that we did, and to the right you can see mid-construction a development next door. And so this backyard renting phenomenon is something that academics and urban specialists have been tracking since about 2011. And it was around 2015, 2016 that the formalization of these backyard rental developments really took off and have become incredibly popular in South Africa's peri-urban townships. Just to give you so a little bit more of an introduction. So BidProp, through innovation, new technology, and systems thinking, we are creating wealth and improving the income for the urban poor by enabling investment into micro-property development at a macro scale. So just to give you a little bit of a background about South Africa, after apartheid, which was a government implemented forced separation of racial groups in South Africa through spatial interventions, after the fall of apartheid in 1994, the new democratic government worked towards providing houses for everyone earning less than 3,500 rand, which is approximately 175,000 rupees or $235 US. And this house was just a 40 square meter house on a freestanding piece of land. But because these houses, and over the last 20 years, the government, or 24 years, the government has developed nearly 4 million of these houses. But because these houses were given for free to beneficiaries earning such a small amount or sometimes had no income at all, what homeowners started to do to access additional income was to add on backyard rental accommodation. And backyard rental accommodation is not new in South Africa. We've seen it for many, many years. but what we're really starting to see now is like an aggregation in the spectrum of backyard properties. So right at the one end of the spectrum, you have an informal dwelling similar to what you will find in an informal settlement or a slum, made with temporary materials, no water, or like a illegal electrical connection from the main house. And what we're seeing more and more is now people developing formal backyard rental accommodation with permanent materials, but often without building plans. And what BidProp is aiming to do is to capitalize on the on the amount of rental that you can get for a formal dwelling with building plans, which also ensures that the tenant has a quality product, a safe product in terms of all the national building regulations, fire regulations, and such. And in this one photograph, you can see that spectrum quite clearly. So on the right-hand side, you see our development that we have done as BidProp with the blue building. The brick building that you see in the background is formal materials, but there was no plans, there were no approved plans when this building went up. And on the left-hand side, you see a backyard dwelling, which is made out of temporary materials and won't have any plans at all. So really just kind of showing you also just giving you an idea of the spatial fabric and the urban fabric of these areas. Also, the gray house that you can see and the purple house are the state subsidized houses, and you can see the open space behind the gray house that most state subsidized houses have area around them to develop and leverage for some form of additional income in some way. So how BidProp works is we have a micro property development fund, which investors can invest into. And then we use that fund to construct these rental units. So we pay the builder, we manage the build process. And once the unit is complete, the unit is handed over to the homeowner. The homeowner has to manage the rent, and the rent is paid directly to BidProp, and then BidProp pays rental, like a small portion of that to the homeowner. So we pay for everything up front, and then we share the rental income, the total rental income, with the homeowner for a period of 8 years until we've recouped our initial capital investment, a small profit, and we take overheads, operating overheads over time. So we identify a homeowner, we have a homeowner process, our application form, where anyone with a property can send us their details, and we'll assess if their property is viable. We do a homeowner training, like a preliminary homeowner training process, whereby we assess if the homeowner is entrepreneurial, if they are ready to have tenants, if they have the necessary skills to manage tenants, because like you saw in that initial picture, you go from being a single family on a large plot of land to now having to share your space quite intimately with 8 to 16 other people. Once we've approved the homeowner, we then begin the regulatory approval process, whereby we submit plans to government for planning approval. Then we find and manage a contractor to build the units, ensuring that the units are built to all the national building regulation standards. Once the units are finished, we assist the homeowner to get tenants by helping them advertise through social media platforms or whatever way necessary we need to. And then we manage the cash flow. So the tenants pay us directly, and then we pay the homeowner out. We also keep a portion for insurance, a portion in a maintenance fund, and we keep aside a bad debt allowance in case there is an empty room or a tenant doesn't pay. We then are trying to broker deals with local banks and financial institutions, and I'll explain a little bit more in detail later why, but we then sell on this investment to a home loan provider as a traditional home loan, so that we can recycle our capital much faster, and we're able to continue to build at scale. So in that way, Bidprop will be reimbursed, and essentially the homeowner will settle with us, and the rental sharing agreement then continues with the financial institution, and we will stay on as an intermediary and manage that rental income for the financial institution. So how we are different to other models, our affordability, we don't assess homeowners based on their current income revenue like a typical financial institution would. We look at the property and how many rental units we can build on the property, and because we are certain that we will be guaranteed rental income. We provide professional services, and by doing this, by basing it on the amount of rental units, we're able to offer homeowners much larger sort of development finance than a typical financial institution who would just look at like the household income would be able to. What we're seeing a lot of in the market is other products that are aimed at backyard rental accommodation, but are just basing the affordability on an income. So what's happening is a household is able to access a small amount of money and build maybe 1 or 2 rooms. And once they start generating an income from those rooms, they're able to access another lump sum of money and put on more rooms. And this incremental bit by bit is great in many ways, but it's also lowering the standard of build and the quality of build. We provide professional services and we manage the construction process. Again, a lot of the institutions that are offering bond or mortgage type loans are disbursing these loans based on milestones, but there's no actual quality control being done on what's being built or how it's being built. These other institutions are not able to offer their clients architectural or engineering services, and that is also affecting the overall quality, the spatial quality more than anything of the rental units that's going up, which then in turn has an impact on the spatial quality of the urban area in its as a whole. And then finally, we also provide professional services. Oh, sorry, that's a repeat. Where did that? What that one's meant to say is that we provide tenant management services and entrepreneurship skills. So we help the homeowner over time learn what it means to become a entrepreneurial property manager, how they should set aside portions of the rental every month to either save up for another property or improve their property in ways like adding security features or free Wi-Fi for their tenants, etc., etc. And so what our model really aims to do is have impact at a number of scales, not just for the homeowner. Obviously, we're trying to provide or trying to enable the homeowner to have a sustainable pension asset. So once we are completely paid up within the 8 years and we step away, this income is supposed to be seen as a sustainable pension for the homeowner over time. The small enterprises that we partner with as construction partners, we're able to help them expand their operations and for them to grow their teams and their businesses through scaling our business. The tenants are able to have access to healthy living spaces at an affordable rental. So we don't put our rentals higher than any of the market related rental prices, but we ensure that our units are of a better quality than the market is providing at the moment. The architect is able to provide impact through designing better quality living spaces, and the neighborhood is impacted through the provision of better quality spaces, which improves the overall property value of that property, but the neighborhood as a whole. Some of the major barriers to entry and why. So backyard development has been done, as I said earlier, since the state housing was provided, but we've definitely seen an increase since about 2011 and a sharp increase since 2015, 2016. Through pieces of research that we did prior to establishing BitProp, we really wanted to understand why people weren't building if they had the property. A number of reasons were related to titling of the property, which I won't go into too much detail about in this presentation, but otherwise there was a general lack of access to architectural services, a lack of being able to, if they were able to start building, to be able to correctly manage the contracting process and negotiate with a builder to ensure like the correct quality of the build. Major barrier to entry was access to finance, as lending and credit laws in South Africa are extremely strict. So what we were finding is homeowners were buying materials on credit at building supply stores for like 25 to 30% interest rates. And then also public infrastructure is a big barrier, as sometimes there's not the infrastructure to support the increased density of backyard rental accommodation, mostly sewage and water. So these are just a couple of images of the developments we've done. So this was Norma Wiese's property before we began, and this was Norma Wiese's property after we developed. So you'll also see we also improved the homeowner's house. This is 8 rental units. Each rental unit is about 25 square meters with a ensuite bathroom and a kitchen sink. These were Dolly's rental units. You can see the kitchen sink and the ensuite bathroom in this. They all, like I say, are approved design, so they have the minimum requirements for livable or habitable spaces. Each property, while we have a standard plan, each property is obviously different, and we have to slightly negotiate how we fit these units onto different properties in different ways. But we're always able to ensure that there's lots of natural light and natural ventilation, which has obviously been critical during the COVID crisis. These are Police's rental units, and what we're really trying to do, instead of putting any kind of branding, is we're really trying to establish ourselves in architectural ways. So you'll see the breeze blocks there. We've added more as a signature than a signature design feature. And this is our current showroom where one of our field agents lives, and he will meet potential tenants and potential homeowners in this space, but it's also his living space. Really just trying to demonstrate that 25 square meters might sound small, but it is very livable in many ways if your space is laid out correctly. So we've been operating for 2 years now, and we have learned many a lesson. One of the biggest lessons that we have learned, and as we go forward, is something that we're becoming a big advocate for, is that the private sector can provide the housing. The private sector is continually proving that housing provision is not the thing that people need help with. Every day there are new developers who are able to design and develop rental accommodation well, and there are new financial services providers who are coming up with innovative financial products. What we really need is these critical partnerships with government to be able to identify precincts where rental housing or rental market demands are increasing, and focus on how those precincts might need rezoning or additional bulk infrastructure or additional social amenities, be it parks, creches, or healthcare services to support the growing rental population as well as the homeowner population. So that's what we're working really hard at the moment, is establishing those partnerships with government. The city of Cape Town is incredibly forward thinking in that way, and you'll hear from Osman Asmal in a bit after me. But this precinct-based approach is crucial if we are going to enable the development of sustainable neighborhoods rather than just an increased density of dormitory neighborhoods. And that's me. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions in the panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire, for that very insightful presentation. I think, yeah, very unique model that you've shared there, how you are working with private investors to invest in rental units. And I really like the kind of support that you're giving in terms of how you assess, you know, the kind of people, the kind of landlords that you would invest in, and looking more at you know, the future process. So I think in terms of, you know, you're able to have a longer vision and maybe support them with that. And then also the professional services you provide, you know, through the managing of the construction, as well as also the tenant management services and entrepreneurship skills. Yeah, I think it's really quite an interesting kind of concept, and it's very I think it's, for me, it looks to me like it's quite sustainable in the long run, depending on how it is managed. I see there are quite a number of questions already for you, but maybe I'd want to hold that until the end when we'll be having the Q&A session. I don't know if Osman is here, but I think we don't have much time though, because we were, is Osman here? Maybe we could give him just a couple of minutes to chime in a little, otherwise we'll move to the next speaker.
Rebecca, Osman isn't online as yet, so
Okay.
we may move to the next speaker, and if and when he joins, then you can bring him in.
Okay, all right, thank you, Anindita. Okay, so thank you very much again, Claire. So now we will move to our next speaker, is Vadi Gang. Vadi is a housing and urban development expert. She's currently based in Amsterdam, where she's working as an independent consultant. Ms. Vadi will share with us experiences of how petty landlords have been facilitated to access finance to enable them provide rental housing in Jordan. And I think also it's a model that is also being explored in Colombia. So I welcome you, Vidi, to share with us those experiences from the two countries. Welcome.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks again to all of the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present here today. It's very exciting to hear all of these discussions around rental housing in India, and I'm very curious to see what comes as a result of these policy labs that you have been organizing over the last few months. So as I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes, you
Great.
can see it very well.
So as Rebecca said, I'm going to talk about a case study in Jordan, a program that was implemented a few years ago, and then also give us a little snapshot of an upcoming World Bank project in Colombia, both of which support what we're talking about, the small scale landlords, and then tie all of this back to India to see what, to share some of my thoughts and ideas about what we can do, what can be done in the Indian context. So when you look at the universe of rental housing, it's typically these three groups of, you can group the owners into these three categories. And the two on the right are usually, very deeply entrenched in the formal system and have comparatively better access to financial products and mechanisms to produce rental housing. Whereas, at the same time, we know that it's actually the individual and the small scale landlords that provide the bulk, that they are the dominant owners and suppliers of rental housing stock, both in developing countries and developed countries and across the income segment. But unfortunately, there are very few, if any, financial products and mechanisms tailored to this group, and which unfortunately manifests itself in the form of either inadequate or insufficient housing, especially as we go down the income pyramid. I think what's exciting, obviously, as we're talking about cases around the world, is that, this is a topic that governments and countries and people all over the world are talking about. And, which is why I've put these two pictures here. The one on the top is a picture from India, where it's a single family home, a family building their home with a few rooms to rent out. And then at the bottom is an accessory dwelling unit on the other side of the world in California, built in the backyard of a single family home. And, the challenges are the same. Obviously, it looks different, contexts are very different, but in both cases, the question is, how do we finance these units? So I think, obviously, especially with the pandemic, these kind of issues have really come to the fore. And so it's exciting to discuss these two cases. I'll go right into the Jordan one. So Jordan has a population of about 10 million, and is actually almost 10% of their population is refugees. And over the last decade, over the last 15 years, there has been, Jordan has seen rapid population growth, the bulk of which has been driven by a significant influx of refugees, especially from Syria and Egypt. And of course, in response to this influx, there has been a lot of home building, construction activity. And in fact, between 2004 and 2015, the housing stock nearly doubled. And it's important to note that most of that housing stock was actually built by the private sector, including what we're talking about, the owner builders, so the small scale builders, but as well as private developers. And unfortunately, as is the case in a lot of other places, the kind of housing that was built was targeted more at the middle and the higher income households, which obviously leaves the bottom 40% of households with few good or affordable choices for housing, and forcing them into cramped and overcrowded living conditions, or as has been talked about several times now, housing that doesn't have access, without access or with limited access to services. And if you look at the map, the blue circles show the concentration of Syrian refugees. And as you can see, it's really concentrated in the north of the country, near the border with Syria. And in fact, more so in the urban areas. So over 80% of Syrian refugees in Jordan live in urban areas, not in the camps. And obviously this has led to a competition for resources among host communities and refugee communities, and therefore to increasing tensions. The typical response, among other responses of humanitarian actors in such a context, is usually to provide rental subsidies to the refugees. In 2014, the Norwegian Refugee Council actually designed and implemented a pretty innovative program, saying, based on the premise that, yes, on the one hand, we need to solve the housing crisis for Syrian refugees, but we also need to address these social tensions. We need to facilitate social integration between the host communities and the refugees. So how do we do that? And so the program included NRC invited landlords who were interested in extending their home to apply for a grant. And I think Claire talked about this a little bit in the BitProp case as well. NRC, obviously there was a vetting of these landlords and their properties. So looking at the physical condition of the property, looking at the location of the properties, etc., before they decided that the landlords could go through and were eligible for this financing. And in return, the landlords would have to provide accommodation rent-free to refugee households for anywhere between 12 to 24 months. And NRC provided assistance to the refugees, in terms of negotiating and implementing these agreements, connecting them with other community groups for other assistance. And of course, as you can see, as you can imagine, the Jordanian landlords did hire local labor. They procured materials locally to build these home extensions. And as I mentioned earlier, it's in the north of the country that there's the bulk of the refugee population. So this project was implemented in the north in 3 governorates, which at the time were home to nearly 25% of the registered Syrian refugees. And the way it worked, so typically Jordanian families, they expand, they build their homes, they add an upper floor over time to accommodate a growing family, and as and when they have the money. So what this did in a lot of cases, of course not every case, but this funding from NRC helped to sort of speed that up, and at the same time provide housing, a temporary rent-free accommodation period for Syrian refugees. And the way the funding was provided, it depended, as I said, obviously on the condition of the property, but also on the duration of the rent agreement. So the longer the rental period, the larger the grant. And it typically varied between 1,000 dinars, Jordanian dinars, to 5,600 Jordanian dinars, depending on these two characteristics. And in terms of the selection of, I spoke about the selection of landlords. The selection of refugees also included applications from refugees and a thorough assessment from by NRC of the vulnerability of these families, including their household size, their current living conditions, a threat of eviction if they had housing, the economic status, etc. And in terms of outcomes, the project helped nearly over 1,000 landlords build more than 5,000 units and providing housing to more than 18,000 refugees. And of course, the impact went beyond the direct beneficiaries of the program to also help spur the local economy by creating 20,000 short-term jobs, and also because landlords were procuring materials locally. As I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the housing stock built in the private sector doesn't respond to demand. That was another important feature of this program, was to look at what was the demand in terms of the size and characteristics of housing, both for the refugee families, but also for the Jordanian families, because this housing, so what happened after the program, after that rent-free period, is of course, landlords and refugees, if they could negotiate an agreement to continue the contract, then they did so in some cases, but in a lot of cases, it just went back into, it went back to the household and they used it either for their own use or rented it out in the private market. So, the size and they're typically large families. And so these units really responded to that need, to that demand. And overall, this program helped about 8 to 10% of Syrian refugees. And of course, there's a long way to go. And one of the recommendations of the program, in fact, was to have large scale and sustained impact. It's important that development actors and the government, they need to work together and build on existing public programs, but also to include private sector stakeholders, especially, for instance, microfinance institutions or other financial institutions that are already active in the space of home loans and home improvement loans. And I think that also relates a little bit to what Claire was talking about. In the second case, in the Colombia project, so Colombia is the government of Colombia.
Vidi, just a few minutes. Sorry to interrupt you a bit. Just 3 more minutes only.
Okay, all right, sure. I'll be quick. So So okay, I'll be quick. So the government of Colombia has been pretty active and forward-thinking in the housing space over the years. Currently, the government's focus is more on reducing the qualitative deficit, and the approach is that obviously you need to think about the housing, the quality of the home itself, but it's also about neighborhood upgrading and access to urban infrastructure and facilities and opportunities. And much like the Jordan case, one of the stressors in the housing sector in Colombia is migration from Venezuela. In recent years, nearly 90% of the Venezuelan migrants in Colombia are renters. And the World Bank has been working with the government of Colombia on their existing programs and to help them address this qualitative housing deficit, both for vulnerable Colombian households, but also for migrant Venezuelan households. So this, like I said, this program is upcoming, likely to be implemented next year. And the beauty of it is that it builds on the existing policies and existing programs. And while adding with an added dimension of, let's look at the migrant situation, let's look at the current, the pandemic, the fallout from the pandemic, and how do we address it. So it does include home improvement subsidies, which is the largest component of the project, but also, like I said, financing neighborhood upgrading interventions. So whether it's parks and green spaces or health centers, cultural centers, all of those things. And I won't go into the details of the eligibility criteria, but there is a focus on how do we facilitate an integration of Colombian host communities and Venezuelan migrants. And then bringing it to India, I think, it's a similar, there is plenty of anecdotal evidence that, we know that it's small scale landlords that are providing the bulk of housing for the urban poor and migrants in India. So it is possible to adopt a similar approach. And to me, one of the biggest takeaways is an integrated approach between facilitating this access to housing and also improving urban infrastructure. And the good thing is that, there's a pretty solid, I think Dr. Rao talked about this, there's a pretty solid policy framework, both in housing as well as related urban development initiatives in India. And then combining that with the private sector actors, the financial institutions that are already active in this space, but also the supply side actors, whether it's materials manufacturers, suppliers, architects, engineers, planners, and really to sort of bring them all together to create a program and maybe a pilot program to begin with, based on the successes that these existing programs have already had, and then to build that up to include small scale landlords as affordable rental housing providers in India. Thank you. That's it. I hope I stuck to the time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vidi. You did extremely well. You're just right on time. Yeah, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation. Quite interesting to see the models, both for, I think the one for Jordan is quite more established. There's a lot of work that has already gone there, and looking at the program and how they're trying to see how they can also, apart from the social integration, but then also, trying to see how they're supporting both the refugees and the host communities. And then looking at how that is potentially going to be applied in Colombia. Again, also Colombia dealing with the same issue of refugees. And I like also the way you've also linked it now to the India case, and seeing how it can also be, there can be some sort of cross-learning, given that in India, there's already an enabling environment in terms of the policy framework, and the private sector stakeholders are also there. And I think just trying to see how that can be kind of tailored for the Indian context. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. There's several questions again for you and some comments, and I think maybe we'll take that on during the Q&A session. So yeah, so thank you very much, Vidi. So I think next we move to our last presenter for this part, for this session. This is going to be, our next speaker is going to be Banashri Banerjee, who is an urban planner, researcher, and teacher. Banashri works as an independent consultant and as an associate staff member of the Institute of Housing and Urban Development Studies in Rotterdam. So she will be presenting on rental housing for migrant workers in Ludhiana in India. So welcome, Banashri. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you. I don't seem to be able to start my, there's something gone wrong with the video, but I think the screen share is working. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, and I can see your screen too. I can see your
Okay.
presentation.
So that's great. But
Yes.
so I guess you won't be able to see me, but you'll be able to see my screen, which is better.
Yeah, sorry about the video part from your end.
Well,
Sorry about that.
yeah, it's just giving me a message that the video camera is not functioning, and I should look for another one in the in the settings. But I don't know if I have time to go to settings and look for another camera. So I think I'll just give it a pass.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we'll see you, Rebecca, and we'll see my presentation. That's even better.
Yes. Yes. I see it very well. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm going to talk about a particular housing subsystem in the city of Ludhiana in Punjab. And it is particularly for its rental housing for migrant workers. And I think here, I first started doing work on it in 2014 and then followed it up in 17 and 18. In 2014, when I started work on it, there was also work going on the slum-free plan of action being prepared by CURE and Renu Khosla and her team and myself. We did quite a lot of promotion of this kind of housing with the state government and with the municipality, because there was hardly any recognition of this housing, though it's pretty large scale. So that's where it comes from. And fair enough, Dr. Rajeshwar Rao, he mentioned that whatever was done before 2020 is outdated, and we need to do that study all over again. So what I've been doing is that kind of following up on the telephone with the contacts in Ludhiana, which is, and to ask them what's going on with the Veras there after this whole crisis of migrants leaving and the lockdown and so on. So this is a background. Now this, in this presentation, yes, it's about the Veras, which accommodate more than 200,000 migrant workers in Ludhiana. And in this presentation, what I'm going to explore is how this particular submarket works in the context of the city's economy, its governance, and its land and housing setting. But then also, I'm going to be looking at the livelihood strategies of migrant workers, which is the demand side. And then finally raise issues around supporting rental housing for the poor through policy and practice. So first, if we look at the context, we see that Ludhiana has faced a huge amount of population growth, as you can see. In 1951, it had a population of 150,000 people. And now it has gone to a city of something like, right now, it would be 1.8 million. And it's faced a lot of rapid growth because it is an industrial center. And these industries, which started way back in the 1930s, were really large and medium-sized formal, informal industries started coming in, basically from the 1970s, I would say. So that is the period when the city really grew very fast. And then more recently, in the last decade, we see that the construction sector has taken on with a lot of luxury housing, with shopping malls, and also with large-scale government infrastructure coming in. Now, there are about more than 350,000 migrant workers, and most of them are from the two states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And they're employed as industrial and construction laborers. And then they also have, they work as rickshaw pullers and vendors and hawkers and so on. Yeah. The other thing is there's been very little formal housing for low-income groups. Yeah. And another thing to note is that 52% of the city area, according to the studies of the master plan, they consist of unplanned growth. And when the master plan came into operation in 1991, much of the city had already grown. Informal rental housing, which we are talking about in these vedas, they're occupied by migrants, and they make up 13% of the housing stock of the whole city. And this 69% is the formal housing stock, and the rest is informal in the form of unauthorized colonies or illegal subdivisions, the slums, as well as the informal renters. Now, this is again the context. You see that it's, these figures, the number of Vedas, about 850. Population, it's again fluid. That's because, these kinds of systems, not only in Ludhiana, a lot of these informal rental housing, it's kind of a hidden thing. As Aparna had also mentioned earlier, that it's very difficult to find out about them. Though here in the case of Ludhiana, it's informal, but it is an organized activity and pretty large scale. But still, there's not much of information about it, and this is all, the kind of field workers in the municipality who have these estimates of, people living in over there, and also the trade unions. Now, these Vedas are mostly, you see, these eggs that you see are really where the industries have developed in the city over the years. There are also scattered all over, but these are the large industrial zones. And then the red things that you see are the slums and the Vedas, which are pretty close to the industries. And they developed, and what happened is that once these industrial estates came up, the surrounding areas, which had earlier been farms and fields, they got informally converted into habitation. And most of them are located in that kind of zone. Yeah. And this housing typology, the Veda as we're talking about, it's basically rooms built around a courtyard. And it originated in the state of Punjab, particularly there. You have it all over the world, this kind of typology. But in Punjab, it was basically to house farm labor. And then later on, it got adapted for urban. And this is basically the built up areas in Ludhiana. And you can see that where most of the Vedas are, they span this whole time zones, which are going back from the 80s right down to 2010. This is the kind of situation that you see. So they started developing then, and there's the maximum amount developed up to about 2010 or so. Now, if you look at these Vedas, you would see that, like I already said, these are rows of rooms built on long sides of plots with a narrow courtyard in between, as you can see. And the number of rooms in each Veda can vary from 10 to more than 100. Actually, some people said that it would be the largest Vedas have about 180 or 190 rooms in them. And the smaller ones are single or double storied, but the larger ones can be up to four storied. Room sizes are very small, 10 to 15 square meters. They are by no means conforming to any kind of standards, but that's, and especially when you see the occupancy. You have 4 to 6, male workers who stay in shifts. They work in industry, and then somebody's there sleeping there in the daytime, and somebody else comes and sleeps at night. And then you have this occupancy by families. The rents are between 1,500 to 2,500 per month, so pretty low. But then that's for a very small room, and shared services, which are in the courtyard or at the end of the upper corridors. And here, it's particularly distressing to see that the number of persons per latrine is 12 to 35 persons use one latrine. So that's the kind of provision we're talking about. And the issues obviously are overcrowding, poor ventilation, insufficient services, and then also drinking water contamination, which happens because of large amount of waterlogging in the larger area, and also overflow of sewage which mixes with the drinking water. So who are the people who are living and renting in these? So let's go to the owners first. If you look at the right hand side, the owners are actually the owners. They own the land. Yeah? And some of them they own several vedas, and manage the small vedas are managed by the landowners themselves. But then for the larger vedas, or the landlords who have many of these vedas, they employ managers. And I couldn't meet them, but then I was told during the focus group discussions that some of these Veda owners are big persons, yeah, and their names were not disclosed. So there's, sort of more to be found out there. But then some are the small guys, they own shops in that area, they're pretty accessible and all that. But it's also important that they consider, the bhaiyas, or people who come from that area of Bihar and UP, as they're, known colloquially in Punjab as trouble-free tenants. Yeah, and these by the land owners. And the landowners particularly have good relations with the police to manage all this. How do they find the renters? Well, there are several ways. The renters actually come through their own networks to particular Vedas, or when there are labor contractors who bring them as labor to industries or to for construction. And these labor contractors have also links with the owners who bring the renters. Now, the renters, typically they earn between 8,000, 20,000, the average is 11,000, yeah. They complain of poor services, but don't want to raise the rent. And many of them, they go to back to their village, or they go to rural Punjab during the harvest season. So they occupy these Vedas in a very flexible way. But they like to come back to the same neighborhood, if not to the same Veda. There are these welfare associations of people from those regions. There are also trade unions for industrial workers. Then there are a couple of municipal councillors who are, who are also from UP or from Bihar, actually, but they don't have any say in housing conditions, which are actually, controlled by the owners. The provocation there is to keep, prices low, because the renters cannot pay high rents or do not want to pay. And
sorry to interrupt you. Banashri.
Okay, I'm getting there.
We have just 2 more minutes.
Oh, 2 more minutes. Okay. So, the crux of this whole thing is that, there is a kind of a belief that if there aren't paper agreements, and there's likely to be exploitation of renters and things like that, but that doesn't happen. Yeah. So there are very rare cases of eviction, and landowners also, the owners also help with the police identity and all that kind of thing. And during the COVID period, they gave them rent amnesty and also fares to go home. But what is also very important is that these veras don't exist in a kind of a vacuum. There is a whole lot of, these support systems which are there. And in Ludhiana, you would find these kind of mini towns within the city where in this picture you have this street which has shops which are full of people, goods and restaurants and things from that particular region. And so that's a great support for the veras which kind of open out from that kind of street. What has been the role of the municipal corporation? Like I said, there's not much information. Uh, they are basically preoccupied with the health aspect, that when things go wrong, when there are pandemics, when there's an epidemic of gastroenteritis or something, then they kind of kick in. There is municipal water supply and sewerage available, but not adequately. But none of these had started with any kind of building approval, but some of them have got their buildings regularized retrospectively. And the municipal corporation says that there are no standards available for labor quarters, that how many toilets, what should be the size of rooms and so on. So it's very difficult for them to control. And in terms of taxation, many of the owners pay tax. And now there's a proposal to increase this tax by based on the rateable value. Yeah? So with this kind of rapid presentation, just what can we do with policy and practice to, for this kind of subsystem? So I say it's a three-pronged strategy, which earlier Aparna had also alluded to, that we first of all need to recognize, and in this kind of case, you accept the reality of the large-scale supply and recognize it as a valid subsystem in policy. Then the second thing is to support, maybe, consider support to owners. They own the property with loans like the previous speakers had been discussing. Then explore, private sector partnerships or, the CSR funding for water and sanitation, because it affects workers' health. And so industry should be able to come in with some kind of support. Then also look at access to adequate services as part of the universal access policy of the Swachh Bharat mission. This also Aparna had talked about. And then in the case of Ludhiana, they need to improve area-wide drainage, because that whole area is a low-lying area, and that's a problem. The third prong of the strategy is to regulate. Yeah? Define building bylaws and service standards appropriate for the veras in the city and the state, which is not there at the moment, and encourage owners to build, to get building permission and to ensure compliance. Now, very briefly, this wider kind of learning that we have from this case study. Yeah? We're all talking about down market rental housing. It is a prolific, though hidden market. I shy away from calling it informal because it's kind of in between solution. Then precise quantification is again not possible. Yeah, but it's possible to understand, the trends and the practices on which we can work. And the dynamics of supply and demand are specific to each city. Yeah. So, and the other thing is that for most migrants, these urban-rural linkages are very important for their livelihood strategy. So I think that it is of vital importance for whenever we're talking about policy and practice for rental housing for the urban poor, to keep these kinds of things in mind and then go ahead with that, especially with tailor making solutions for conditions of a particular city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Banashri. Fantastic, great, brilliant presentation from you there. Very interesting to see the case from Ludhiana. I was really impressed by the way you documenting the informal rentals. I think it's very important. I think, and like you say, this is often a hidden market that is very important even in terms of the local economy and so on. So, and you see that also from the various, I think some of the images you showed us. And I think also towards the end, the three-pronged approach that you're proposing, I think it's really great. I think it's also a good way for us to come to an end to this session. It's around how we recognize support and then also regulate, because I think if we kind of embrace this kind of three-pronged approach, it's more of kind of how do we recognize that it's how do we recognize the informal or the hidden market, and then how do we support it, and then how do we bring it in a way that it can be properly kind of regulated within the normal bylaws or standards that have been set up by the state. Thank you very much for that great presentation. So now I will hand over to, we have some question and answer Q&A. We were supposed to have a Q&A session, but because of time, we will address some of that later, maybe through communication. Although I noticed some of the questions have already been answered, especially those that came in through the Q&A tab. A few questions came in and on the tab, the chat tab, which I will share with the speakers to provide answers at a later time. So thank you very much for those three beautiful presentations from all our three speakers, from Claire, from Vidhi, and Banashri. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Aparna, who will be taking over the next session where we'll have a panel discussion. Over to you, Aparna.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, and also thank you very much for being absolutely in time. You know, we are, by Indian standards, this is nothing. We are just 5 minutes delayed, so 5 minutes is nothing for us as such. But I try to be on time, and the idea is to have a conversation now. So I would be just a facilitator or the moderator, and I have this great opportunity to now invite my panelists. And as you know that it's not that how we decide, things are always a bit, uncertain. So Jan, who is supposed to be with us over the panel, is out for a very important meeting, but she would join back. So just Anindita or someone, please let me know when she comes back. We will take her into the panel. But we have a very rich panelists who are here with us, very rich experiences. So we have Felipe Walter Correa. I think I am pronouncing your name properly. So Felipe Walter Correa is the director of a system of housing, Ministry of Housing, Cities and Territory, Colombia. When I was reading your bio note, I got quite intrigued by this name, system of housing. I think we should have a conversation on that sometime later. But it's a nice way to say not the Department of Housing, but system of housing. And so welcome. So with Felipe, we have Linu Sehgal. Linu, is it possible to now switch on your video, or is it still not working? We don't have the fortune to see you as yet.
No, it's not working actually.
Okay.
I tried a lot, but the laptop was not working. The phone is not showing the video. I don't know what is the problem.
Doesn't matter. I think we will deal with it. So Linu Sehgal is the commissioner planning at the Delhi Development Authority, Delhi. This is parastatal, which is a very important organization in Delhi's landscape. And so thanks, Ninu, for agreeing to be with us and to share your ideas. Then Jan is going to be coming, but she is not here right now, we know. And Jan is a senior urban economist with the World Bank. Then we have Hong So Lee. He's from ADP. And Hong, is it possible for you to switch on your video? Is that working? Yes. Wow. Yeah. Hi. So we have Hong with us, and then Danilo. Danilo is from Asia Foundation. Danilo Barlos Tenebre. Yeah. Danilo, welcome. So Danilo is with us, and then we have our youngest, maybe, Rushil. Rushil Palavala. Rushil, can we see you? It's too mystified. Yes, now it's better. Yeah, now with the light correct lighting. Yes. So welcome everyone. And I have this good opportunity to steer this discussion for the next 45 to 50 minutes. And the way I have structured is that I would just give you the, the kickoff or the leading questions, and please share your experiences with us. And I'm just wondering if it is okay. Can I invite Osman? I didn't get the answer from you as yet, but Osman, are you with us here? I think you are here, no?
Yes, we
Osman?
see Osman. Osman, you'll have to unmute yourself.
And if you can also put the video on. Oh, okay. I think is it working, Osman? Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thanks.
Now we have it.
Sorry, I've been struggling with my link with you.
Yeah, but we still can't see you.
Does that link me up now?
Yes. Wow. Great. All set. Yes. So this is the first conversation we would have, Felipe and Osman, because Jan is not here. Maybe, because you have the first-hand experience on it, that we all know that in global South, informality is something that we have it. Now, there are a lot of discussion whether we should conceptualize it as a formal, informal, but we know that our reality is that most of the operations are happening in an informal manner, and it is not that is either it is formal or informal, but it is always in this gray area. Now, as a public administrator, when you have to deal with such things which are not part of the formal processes. So my question is that, acknowledging this fact, and we have seen it in our presentation, that urban poor access rental housing through informal markets, and most of this is supplied by the urban poor. But none of this transaction is happening in a formal domain. If that is the case, then as a public administrator, what are the steps or what are the special considerations that you have in your public policy approaches where you have been able to respond to such such kind of a situations? So what is your steps that you have taken? So I would request Felipe to go first on this, that in Colombia, how have through the policy discourse you have address these issues, followed by Osman, how you have done it in South Africa. Yeah, over to you, Felipe.
Okay, good morning. It is 7:45 here in Colombia. And thanks, Aparna, for the introduction. And thanks to you all for having me. So first, related to the question of the housing system, we have in the Ministry of Housing like three directions for cities, direction for housing, and direction for housing subsidies. So to simplify, it's like direction of housing policy, the one I'm leading. So that was regarding your first question, previous to the question that we are going to address now. So first, I know this panel, it's more related to rent, but I want to talk about how we in the government have been addressing informality, and particularly informality related to housing from the different policies. So I'm going to talk about first the governance system in Colombia. Second, how we have managed to build a housing policy that is built in a way that is like conceived in a way of a ladder to formalize people incrementally, and then a particular focus on renting. So first, when I had a chance to study in London, and I had plenty of Indian colleagues studying with me. So we found out in our conversations that a planning system in India is quite different to the Colombian governance system. So the important thing here is that after 1986 in Colombia, both mayors and governors are elected directly through direct vote. And this established a very different relationship with between the population and the people. And secondly, the Constitution of 1991 established that territorial planning and development was a responsibility of local authorities and not from the central government. This is very significant in how different cities have been addressing growth, both formal and informal. And in this sense, it's very important to indicate that the municipality has a very active and indispensable role in planning in Colombia. They are in charge of the regulation of land uses, the sectoral coordination with between local and national policies, and the development of programs and projects related to affordable housing and urban development programs, which are like included in the land use plan, or Plan de Ordenamiento Territorial, as we call it here. So this decentralized function enabled cities to tackle or to address informality directly. And so after 1991, very significant formalization projects have been implemented at the local level. So first, we have, like from the national government, we recognize that first local authorities implemented these formalization programs, which included housing as well as neighborhood improvement programs, and this was mainly first implemented in the two biggest cities, Bogota and Medellin. Bogota, the capital city, and then Medellin. In Medellin, particularly in 1991, the city implemented a comprehensive program for the improvement of suburban neighborhoods, which was called PRIMED, and this was through an integrated approach which included improvement of public transport, the provision of public space, the construction of public facilities, and the implementation of housing improvement programs. Then in 2009, the government approved the Compass, which is like the public policy document at the national level, the Compass 3604, which established the framework and methodology for neighborhood improvement through an integral approach. So this was very important because the national government recognized the effort did by these cities, like the biggest cities, which has had the institutional capacity to develop strategies. So through this national policy, we established the framework and methodology for middle-sized cities, which normally have less institutional capacity to implement as well these home as well neighborhood improvement programs. So that related to how both from local and national government we have been addressing informality in a larger scope. So now when we come to housing, in 1993, 45.3% of the Colombian households were in housing deficit. From this, 20.3% were in qualitative deficit, and 25% were in 20.3% were in quantitative deficit, and 25% were in qualitative deficit. So after that, in 2018, housing deficit fell to 17.2%, which represents a reduction of 29 percentage points. But here, the very important thing is that quantitative deficit was only, just saying like it was lower, it was 4.9%, and qualitative deficit was almost 3 times bigger, and it was 12.3%. So here we were facing a very significant challenge in which housing deficit was not concentrated mainly in quantitative deficit, but substantively in qualitative deficit. So why this? The government for many years was focused on acquisition, on how to provide housing to people, but then we had aside a qualitative deficit, which was concentrated mainly in informal settlements. That's why we thought our housing policy, when this government began, we started thinking of the housing programs and the housing policy entirely as a ladder and as a way of formalizing people step by step. So the first step is our program Casa Digna, Vida Digna, which is focused in housing and neighborhood improvement programs. Housing improvement comprises first titling, which for us is the first step towards formalization of the household, because after you acquire your title, the ownership of the land and of the house, you're able to start upgrading and improving your house. So the first step is titling. The second one is the access to public services. The third component is home improvement itself, like the characteristics of the home, toilets, floors, the kitchen, and then the structural components of the house. And then we have the neighborhood improvement program, a component which includes both public space and the construction of social facilities, public facilities for people. So that's our Casa Digna, Vida Digna, which is like the home improvement, neighborhood improvement program. This is implemented by the national government in partnership with local governments. This enables us a very close relationship with local governments, and therefore success in the implementation, because we noticed that when we implemented the program only from the national government, we had difficulties in field. So we partner with local government to implement this first step of the ladder, Casa Digna, Vida Digna. Here we're thinking, and this is funded fundamentally and entirely with the public budget. So this doesn't include the household or other private sources. So now we're thinking of how to expand the program and enable microcredits, microloans for people to start improving their homes themselves. Because when we don't go into the finance sector, people have to access to the loans for home improvement in the informal market, which normally includes higher cost for households. So that's the first program. The second program is Semillero de Propietarios, which is the rental part of our policy. So here we have envisioned Semillero de Propietarios as a program which is a way for acquisition. So here people get a subsidy for rent for 2 years. This subsidy one part of the subsidy goes for the payment of the monthly rent, and the other part goes for savings in a bank account. So through these 2 years, we enable people not only to access to a rental home, but also to get the credit history they need to afterwards go into the financial market, being enabled in the financial market, and being able to access to mortgages. So in these 2 years, people get that history banks need for them to access to the formal finance market. And that's like the housing rent subsidy we have. And then the third one is Mi Casa Ya, which is the acquisition and like the final step of the ladder, and is the acquisition subsidy, and it's divided in two. One is the subsidy for the first installment of the housing mortgage, and then the monthly payment, the monthly reduction of the mortgage payment, which is also subsidized by the government. So in general, as I have told you, we have built this formalization ladder, which begins with, we can say, tiling for households who are already living in informal settlements and want to improve their homes. Middle step, which is renting, and thought as a vehicle for acquisition. And the third one is Mi Casa Ya, which is the acquisition subsidy, both for the down payment and the monthly reduction of the mortgage. So that's in general how we conceived our policy in terms of formalization, recognizing that in the developing world we face these both realities of growth, formal, mainly in the head of contractors and the construction sector, but also recognizing the reality that informality is present in our cities.
Yeah, thanks for this this kind of an overview. What I understand from here is that there is still this debate going on that we have to formalize the informal. So that's the reason this ladder is there, and the discussion is also around the title, that you have to have the title, because only through the title then you can get formalized and you can access the credits. Thank you for this. I think now I would just invite Osman, and I would request Osman to be brief in a way that we want to have a conversation, so that in our last conversation with you, I was just wondering that you as a kind of government person, you have really redefined the role of the planners and the planning. Would you like to talk about it? How you engaged and did this rental housing. So I'm just wondering, Osman, would you talk about that part of the role that you did?
Thank you. I think perhaps let me just outline and sketch that in 2019, Cape Town's housing shortage stood at something like 365,000 unit shortage. And informality is a significant portion of Cape Town. And it's something that has grown over the last 25, 26 years post-democracy. So thanks for the opportunity to share some of our thinking and some of our processes. I think what we've seen is in areas where people have security of tenure and site access to property, if we as a local authority or local government play a more proactive role than just a regulatory role. So if we choose just to play the regulatory role and stand by and watch the market, we're actually not as influential and facilitative as we can be. And the last 10 years has been quite a successful story in one of our biggest townships in Cape Town and one of our poor areas called Khayelitsha, with youth unemployment, for example, in that area over 50%. I think what we've seen there is where people have security of tenure, and we as a planning authority play a facilitative role, not just sitting back, but engaging with the landowners, engaging with people, saying to them, here are options of plans, come in and get your building plans approved. We've seen almost a 50% submission of building plans coming in. And over that time, the interesting thing is not just submission of building plans, but people have gone beyond just building their own house. They've gone to starting to set up rental units themselves. So in a sense, it's become a successful local economic development activity for many people. In fact, there's something like 35 to 40,000 of these small units that have gone up, and that complements the housing supply that government or other groups would have come in to provide. I think a lot of it has been through very proactive planning officials that are based in our planning offices in that area. They go out, the building inspectors go out. We don't start from the basis of a very strong regulatory approach, but a advocacy, support, communication, engaging. There are times when we have to get into regulatory, for example, after talking to people and working through when people then sort of build across building lines, those types of things, we have to step in. But the key here is to get people to voluntarily come in and take up the opportunities that are available. Previously, we would wait and get our building plans come to submit it to our offices, whereas this way it's actively going out, partnering with the different stakeholders, whether it's the individual house owner, whether it's non-profit organizations, whether it's small companies, bigger private or profit-driven organizations, etc. It's been working with them and proactively going out to those stakeholders to see. And I think the last 10 years have clearly demonstrated a success with people coming online and putting in building plans and things like that. The learning lessons from that have been fed back through different places. And I think the learning lessons have fed back into things like our municipal planning bylaw, where we've given permission now, or we've added the rights for a third dwelling unit per urban, which was something that was a learning lesson that's come out from that particular suburb, and our learning lessons through those engagements with those communities and people wanting to take up those rights. The interesting thing is that complements entirely the objective of a dense city or a compact city from a broader planning perspective, and I think it's a win-win scenario in that approach. So I would say the key for us in this has been very much about collaboration, about being proactive and moving above. So the base, we see the regulatory approach as the base from which we work. It's a strong base. It must be there, but we've got to build on top of that. And building on top of that means, how do we facilitate? How do we enable? How do we reach out to our different stakeholders? And I think that has been the success for over the last few years. There are challenges, absolutely, and I think that those challenges work, I think, in probably most cities and most organizations, a limitation in resources, language barriers sometimes, the skills training, etc. Whilst there is opportunities, the skills pipeline is not resilient enough at this point in time. We are building it up with a number of different groups, etc. But it takes time, and I think those challenges, one's got to work at them all the time. But yeah, I think we've also learned from other examples of endorsement. So what we would do is also endorse different groups. We as a local authority would say, okay, from a quality perspective, these groups or any group that can make a minimum criteria can apply to us. And we're thinking about using that endorsement to endorse a number of groups, whether it's non-profits or private organizations, etc., for them to be able to provide a quality service to those different landowners. And that's off the shelf. So in a sense, we don't, as a municipality, procure anything, but we give a quality service and a quality assurance supply to the local stakeholders for where they can link up to. So I've shared a couple of examples of how we've approached this. It's largely through collaboration, to building on the regulatory base that we have, but it's also learning from that to inform our policies and things like that, to improve on the policy environment and the regulatory environment that we're working in. I'm going to stop there and hand back and take questions later. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point, that where the planning should not only limit itself to be a regulatory or a restrictive thing, but also has this agility to adapt. My takeaway from this conversation with Osman is that if the whereas what Banushree just presented, anyway they are building, there is a local market, there is a local demand, it is going to happen. So how one can at least produce quality, or at least suboptimal level of construction quality. I think if we can also adapt to those changes, maybe that is also a possibility that we can have, that we do not just allow anything but not have that utopian standard also, but how one can adjust to it would be an interesting thing to look forward. I would now then invite Hong, you and Danilo, and also Linu, because Linu is into planning, and Hong, you are also doing work with the basic services, and so what my question to three of you is that what Mr. Felipe just said, no, that you first give a titling and then you give the access to services, basic services. So I'm just wondering that, is it possible for us to de-link this two by using some spatial planning instruments? And we say we recognize these areas, and we say that, okay, basic services are critical for any neighborhood, and we do not have to really link it up with the titling. So in your viewpoint, what are the possibilities that we have to use such areas which are not conforming to the formal planning tools or planning regulations, but to extend services there, because they do exist, and then there is a local market that is there. So in your experiences, if you have done some work like that, um, what would be your response towards this kind of a situation? If it is not conforming, then what do we do with such areas? So Hong, would you like to go first, and then maybe Linu, you come in, and Danilo at the last, if that's the order we can maintain. Yeah, Hong, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Apana. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for this opportunity for me to share my humble experience working at our urban sector group in sustainable development and climate change in ADB. Actually, even if I'm not the direct project officer for the India region, I'm working closely with the project officers to provide the innovative way of thinking, as well as some knowledge sharing activities for the urban development. Actually, most of the critical topics and pertinent points are already discussed and covered from the earlier speakers and sessions, but please let me focus, try to start from the infrastructure area first. Actually, as we are fully aware, most of the urban services and infrastructure for vulnerable groups, including the migrant workers and the poor, are already huge challenge even before COVID pandemic in many of cities and countries, including India. As such, probably the city planners could consider proceeding a quick analysis on the of the actual characteristics of housing demand and supply, which is also mentioned by Dr. Rao, taking into consideration the existing and potential infrastructure capacities for the neighborhood before the commitments of allowing the urgent provision of affordable rental housing through the private sector. Actually, we need to understand about the density. We need to understand the difference between the overcrowd needs and proper density. And as we can see, the background rental scheme by Claire or the Vera by Anastri, the typologies are more based on peri-urban context or adjacent industrial complex. So we may need to consider whether it could be still applicable to the overcrowded or dense urban context in the middle of the cities in India. And I understand that there are many valuable institutions, NGOs, and grassroots in the communities of Indian cities, as we can see here today. We also see the comprehensive analysis for the 4 cities presented by Arpana as well. So I would like to suggest the planners could work with the NGOs and institutions for more detailed analysis, which could support the partial zoning or the land use planning of the neighborhoods for the affordable rental housing. And then depending on the locations, it could be probably just one time under the temporary measure, especially for the overcrowded area in the city, because this is an extraordinary period, so that the cities will still be flexible and catching up the rapid and various urbanization pace for the sustainable urban development. I mean, for the last one, I would like to quickly touch upon about the subsidy. I know there are different models in different countries for low-income group. It could be through the low-income landlords for the required renovation or extension of the housing, or it could be directly to the low-income tenants as a voucher. However, I think the important and prerequisite element will be whether this will be proceeded under the comprehensive social security system, which recognize and realize the equitable, prioritize, and justified subsidy, considering the government's financial capacity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Hong for this, your views on this. And may I now request Linu to come in?
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity, giving me this opportunity to be with all of you. And good evening, namaste to everyone. So I would like to say that I've heard all the views, and I am very happy to tell you that the Prime Minister of the country, he have taken a lot of initiatives in this affordable rental housing scene for the poor. And after the pandemic, he have taken a lot of effort and pain to formulate the policy for the affordable housing scheme. And in that has been already notified in September 2020. So under this scheme, I will just give you a brief outline. Under this scheme, it has been decided that there will be two type of provisions for the builders and for the private players. One where the government has already constructed the housing, so they can come, they can improve it, and there will be a VGF given. So that is one option. And second option is that they will be given land, they can buy land, and 30% can be then given to them for affordable housing, for which they will quote the price, and for 30 years they can collect the rent. So already this provision has been made. So we have to implement this in Delhi. Now, second thing is, this is the affordable housing rental scheme that I am talking about. Second thing is, what we are doing is PMAY Government of India. So PMAY talks about the improvement of the Jhuggi and Jhopli clusters. Under the Swachh Bharat mission, the provision is that you have to come forward and develop the DPR for the area. Like DDA is preparing, DDA is involved in that. And 60% will be given back for the people who are living in Jhuggi clusters, and 40% can be developed as a remunerative component. So when you develop it as a remunerative component, then you get the money to develop this area. You don't have to pay any money. So this is one scheme.
Sorry, Linu, your voice is wavering. Your voice is actually wavering. I'm just wondering. Yeah, can you please come to the closer to the microphone, maybe? Hello? Hello? Maybe she's fixing her connection. Um,
Able to hear me?
yeah, now we are able to hear you. Please.
Okay, okay. So second is PM Uday scheme. So PM Uday talks about the improvement of the unauthorized colonies. There are around 22 unauthorized colonies in Delhi, and these two schemes are implementable in Delhi only, for Delhi, for improving the face of Delhi, for improving the living conditions of the workers in Delhi and the migrants in Delhi. So for that, we have already noted the notification of identification has already been done. Identity means identification of plots. Identification of plots, like you were saying the title, we were talking about the title. So we are talking about the title in the PMOD regulations, which have been notified already in October 2019. So that is one aspect, giving the title to the landowners or the people, like flat wise also, they are staying in this area. So that is one aspect of it. Second aspect is, now when these unauthorized colonies are there, how do we improve the living conditions? So for improving the living conditions of these colonies, what the working is that we are preparing the development control norms. And these development control norms will further substantiate the development, redevelopment, regeneration of these areas. So there are also two aspects in this DCR norms. One is that you can redevelop the area with certain norms which we are prescribed, and two, the colonies which are where the living condition is better, they can come with the layout plan and get it sanctioned, and then get their building plan sanctioned. So these are the two aspects on which Government of India has directed DDA to work upon, and to take care of the people who are staying there. And one more thing, like when we are emphasizing on the rental housing, so these areas, I would like to tell you, they are accommodating a large number of migrant labor and the rental who are there. So we are also making a provision for these people who are staying on rent, so that they are also getting the benefit of the policy of Government of India. So this is
Yeah,
what
great.
I.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks. But I think one of the common theme that runs through all the presenters or all the speakers is that there is an immense belief in the land titling. And
Yeah.
what I understand that from the literature is that only 30% of the land in globally are registered. So only 30%. The 70% operates without registration or without titling. Now, if
Yeah.
that is the case, this particular benchmark is quite steep that we are all trying to achieve. But I think we should aspire for a gold standard. Why not? I would just invite now Danilo. Please be brief because we are now running short of time. So Danilo, please give your inputs very briefly, and then we would bring in Rishil. Yeah.
Yeah, I thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this uh, webinar lab on housing. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I am the lead convener of the Pantawid UPA. Pantawid means bridge, UPA means rent. So when we say Pantawid UPA, we are an advocacy group advocating for the broadening of housing options to include rental housing subsidy program in government menu of housing solutions. You see, in the Philippines, there are limited resettlement programs, and mostly these programs are linked to home ownership. And the problem is when you say home ownership, it involves titling, no? That's one of the questions you want to forward in this discussion. But again, the government has large housing backlog, and there are inadequate programs that answers or cater to the needs of the informal sector, especially the urban poor and the underprivileged. By the way, just to answer directly questions that can services be improved, can infrastructure be developed in areas when I was a community organizing then, aside from titling, there can be, in my experience, especially in these urban poor communities that I worked with, just to share with you, there are other tenurial arrangement that can be what they call this, that can be put into agreement with the government, with the local authority, so that they can stay in the land until such time that the government needs the land for other purposes other than housing. But again, a certain period for them to stay and let the the place be developed so that it can be uh, uh, at least a settlement for these urban poor people. So, I mean, there are other, aside from home ownership, there are other tenurial arrangement that can be done. Anyway, proceeding with what our present group is working on, we are advocating to broaden the housing option to include rental housing subsidy program. What we're proposing is that, especially for those informal settlements that will be demolished because to give way to government infra projects, uh, these informal settler families be given the options to be able to stay in the city to cushion the impact of this location. Remember, most informal settler families stays in stay in cities because there is where they find their livelihood. They can avail of basic social services, the schooling of the children, and other programs that mostly needed by this sector. So the only solution that the present government here in the country is doing is to reallocate them to far-flung areas. And this disrupt the education of children. We know very well all of this. So we're proposing another option for them to stay in the city, to continue with their lives and livelihood and the schooling of the children. But this is not a full subsidy. The subsidy is given by from the range of 2,500 to 3,500. This is computed after a census enumeration was done and the determination of the existing average rental fees that is currently prevailing in the area, plus minus the average of the rental fees that an informal settler families is paying. So we get the amount of subsidies that we are proposing. This is not a full subsidy, part of it, but it's more than, at least in our experience when we computed this, it's more than 50% of the total rental fees. In the Philippines, especially during disaster, there are two communities that were able to implement this. One, the typhoon in one province in the north, and in a city in Metro Manila, the San Juan city, practiced this rental housing subsidy before putting up their permanent houses, or I mean medium-rise building for them to rent. They were allowed to rent out so that they can start constructing this medium-rise building for their permanent housing. Also for the homeless, it's very effective when the Department of Social Welfare and Development implemented this with the homeless. This time it's full subsidy. Instead of those people just roaming around, these are ambulant informal settler families with no home. No, they just roam around the cities. What the government did was try to house them in both private or public rental units so that they'll be housed there. And they provided a full rental subsidy of about 4,000 per family and other social services that they can extend so that to help these families be streamlined into what you call this, into at least a notch higher than from homeless families to a more formal arrangement. So right now, the current advocacy is with the Congress, it is now on its second reading. It passed the first reading. At the Senate, we have a counterpart bill. But with the executive department, the newly Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development, we're trying to influence that they consider this program as part of the Balay rental housing program of the current administration. And also at the local level, at the local government level, there are local government or LGUs that are initiating through the city ordinance to come up with this program so that you retain your people in the city, unlike sending them out for another city, because it's costly and it entails a lot of time to be able to house them there. So
yeah, I take your points. I take your points, Danilo. I think it's very well said. What we are trying to articulate, that this is also the premise that we are trying to build on, that there is a rental continuum. It is not like the urban poor is not a homogeneous group. There is a continuum that exists, and we need to recognize this continuum and build knowledge on that. And your idea as a planner, what we are all talking about is a compact city. So we do not want to make it like a sprawling urban sprawl. We do not want to, put people outside, because then it's much more costly. Um, we are kind of overshot our time, but I would really request now Rochelle to come in. And Rochelle is interesting that he has a very different point of view, and he is aware of the governance structure, but is using technology to address those issues. So Rochelle, please come in and put your viewpoints, and after that I would then invite Jan for your comments. So Rochelle, please give your ideas about how do you think technology can impact this debates that we are having for years and years, no? Formal, informal, whom to include, whom not to include. Yeah, please.
So yeah, firstly, thanks so much for having me. Just to be very brief. So yes, I think tech can play a huge role. To begin with, if you even consider a platform effect, it immediately would create, solve problems of information asymmetry, create certain price rationalization, and we know for a fact that most informal settlements pay much higher. At a unit economic level, pay much higher for rental as well as access to services and infrastructure. As an example, so we've been implementing our platform, rather just started out. Aspiring tenants would typically, suffer from a lack of choice and information. So, an urban poor, a daily wager, doesn't have the time to go and explore property. So say, this is the best one for me. He or she operates within that and usually end up choosing fairly poorly. So technology, one, can provide more choices where they can compare across similar or standardized offerings. And that, of course, builds trust and confidence in choosing when you think you've seen enough. By default, you plug in a lot of other things like optimizations for workplace and other things. And again, when they are exploring outside networks of kinship, you do need an organization or an institutional structure. Even if it's tech, it's an organization that's helping you do that. If you take the supply side, which is our big elephant in the room, the small time landlords, again, like was pointed out earlier, there's an entire plethora of them. You can categorize them based on sizes of property holdings, ticket sizes, frequency of rental, and things like that. So of course, on one end, you have people who are fairly organized. They have managers to help them, source tenants. At the same time, you have guys who do not have those resources and invariably struggle to see, they actually see much higher vacancy rates and are beholden to intermediaries who charge, exorbitant kind of arbitrages. So based on our work already, we've seen tremendous interest from this segment in onboarding properties. And not to forget, we're dealing with a population that comes with a very low ticket size, very high churn rates, low resistance to shocks. And I think tech can mitigate a lot of issues, particularly reducing search and transaction costs. Now, coming to this very important unsolved question of the inertia around regulation and formalization, and we know the obvious reasons why it exists. So I think serving one of the intents of regulation, technology allows you to achieve some degree of categorization or standardization without compromising on the granularity. And this is how we are building it, and this is how we see it, that digitization and data-driven insights, quote unquote AI, can happen before formalization. And we see this as a necessary step in a sequence of transitions rather than overnight deregulation or something of that sort. So we also feel on the policy side, policymakers and governments could in fact benefit from tech because there's real-time data analytics and learnings coming in. Policy could evolve. And I'm going to stick my neck out there and throw it out. I anticipate, or rather a very broad level conjecture of the arbitrage in this ecosystem in India to the tune of $10 to $15 billion. I mean, I'm really throwing it out there, sticking my neck out, but this is what, based on our study, we think. So lastly, yeah, I think the AHRC is a great initiative because we knew, densifying well-serviced city centers or land parcels through AHP or the in-situ redevelopment has a variety of roadblocks. And one does need to go the AHRC route. So I think we could really plug in there also with, accelerating their sourcing and feeding on the demand side. So I'll stop there. But I'm fairly optimistic. Of course, we all are cognizant of the risks and externalities that come with technology.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle. I think many of the things, at least in India, we have experienced, like how our connectivity and how we operate completely changed through this. I do not know whether to use that word disruptive, but it did impacted us. So many things that we were trying to solve through incremental processes, through lot of efforts, but then suddenly everything changed because there is either some new technology that came in, and we are all connected, so I'm very hopeful that there would be some days when there would be no discussion on this titling or formal, informal, and I think we would go beyond it because there is technology. Like what I saw, the way Paytm took over, and the way online, it has its own problems, but it has also, like the way the society adapts, they just kind of changed everything. So I'm also hopeful that AIHRC would recognize that there is a rental continuum, and then there is a possibility of using technology in connecting the landlord and the tenant, directly. And we don't have to be always doing, community mobilization, but there are other ways also to do those things with using new technologies. So now I actually, Jan was supposed to be here with us in the beginning, but she had some important meeting, as I said before. So Jan, I would request you to connect these three streams that we have been talking about. Is what Philippe talked about is local governance and how this local governance matter. And then he talked about this ladder of getting formalized. We are also talking about, how basic services can be done without the titling, or we require the titling, as a must thing to bring those things in the format of in the unfold of the planning. And also what Rushil said about using technology. So I would like to know your viewpoints that, in the prevailing context of AHRC in India, do you think that we can draw some lessons, and is there some way we can make some moves on that front? So what's your way of thinking? What's your viewpoint on this? Over to you, Jan.
Sure, and apologies first of all for leaving in the middle of the discussion. And it's so good to see such amount of energy coming out from speakers, from the audience as well, and being both kind of as part of the organizing team and as a panel list. I see we're opening a whole horizon and a whole set of specific issues that can be actually discussed and debated and, jointly find solutions going forward. So that's, first thing that I want to, comment on. The second thing is that the question that you asked were critical, even at its surface, it doesn't seem to be, all all the way directly related to the rental housing for the, private small landlord, which is, I believe, what this particular session is about, as opposed to the previous 3 labs. But I think it also touches upon, several important dimensions of actually facilitating that market. To first actually begin by recognizing this is an important segment of the affordable housing supply, and which is much neglected before, and only globally literature or research wise is only sort of happening in the last decade or so. So even when we were, from World Bank point of view, we're starting to look into this issue. We also are scratching our heads to see actually, we don't really know much about it. And much of the literature is really on the formal and even go up to very sophisticated capital market solutions on REITs, on the investment side, and all these kind of things. But then look at the developing countries, the global size. Look at India. This is really the bulk of the bulk of the supply for the affordable rental for the poor segment that we are trying to support. And there's a strong kind of demand for a better understanding it. And then as the case in South Africa has shown, actually, there are more and more research initiated both by the government and the other private entities to look into this. The more we look into this, the more insight we got, the more that we can actually, support these as in critical supply. And then what you mentioned on the local governance side, and the latter of the, tenure, and the services provision, technology all came to play. And I would say, on the local government side, what I see, and I worked in South Africa, supporting the National Treasury in supporting this rental of the small landlords. And Cape Town is one of the, very good examples. You've all heard about it. And by being more kind of a demand-driven, proactively facilitating this sector, actually, they are, making a lot of progress in facilitating this sector in the form of, creating. I think part of the solution has been creating overlay zones and supporting, areas where these type of activities can be, explicitly encouraged. And then I think, in the case of Cape Town, there's also a ladder of continuum of tenure where services can be provided in various forms. I would actually leave it to Usman to talk about it if we still have time. And from a administrative perspective, there are also means in which local government can support, such as fast approvals, facilitation of a template of design, accreditation of small contractors to make the construction of quality, and in terms of not creating health hazard or safety hazards, things like that nature. And the local government also can actually by supporting upgrading neighborhoods, providing such basic services, upgrading of those services, can better facilitate these kind of entrepreneur activities by the landlord and by entrepreneurs like Claire's group and others, right? And in terms of technology, what I understand is that there are also quite a number of emerging kind of private initiatives in South Africa and other places. In my country, in China, there's also one big app it has been developed and operated in the last few years by the Alibaba Group, where you actually connect renters and landlord, and then sort of reducing the transaction fees by the agent, and at the same time providing more kind of feedback both on the landlord side and the renter side to reduce the risks on both ends. So then they actually facilitated in great deal the sort of meeting and matching of the demand and supply in that way. I would love to actually learn more about the Indian example as well. So in many ways, there are a lot of dimensions that these critical rental, by small landlord can be supported, both from the government, planning, regulatory, administrative regimes, by recognizing a continuum of tenure, and by providing the much needed services that's sort of a public goods in nature, and actually also facilitating some of the technological development and innovation. Those are all kind of critical dimensions that we can all support. We haven't really talked about the financing side, the voucher scheme. I'm so glad to hear about the Philippine experiences on the demand side support in a targeted way. And I think Colombia has those programs as well. I worked in Philippines before, and I was part of the team actually, supporting the design of that type of instruments in Metro Manila, setting, and then facilitating a rapid assessment of the market and then pricing of that subsidies. So I'm so glad to hear sort of it's being kind of taking off also in the Philippines in such a manner. So from sort of financial point of view, government also have a potential role to play in form of targeted subsidy for the poor, to be able to help them to afford accommodation of their choice, in facilitating mobility in that sense as well. So let me just pause here. I know that we're running out short of time, and happy to contribute later.
Yeah, I think it's not possible to discuss everything, and but what has been a good learning for, I think, all of us is that we got the kind of an overview, and we can then get into deep dive into each issues and pick up and figure out what's relevant for us, and that's the reason this is called Policy Lab. That we identified few things, and we, I think, would now then build onto it. Um, there are when we were doing internal discussion, there were feedbacks like we have to get into the inclusive discussions, inclusive part of the aspects, because we are talking about urban poor. So there was these issues on gender, there are issues on how to accommodate everyone, which also Georg said in the beginning, leave no one behind, kind of a discussion. What I would say from this particular panel, I take away 3 points that it's important that local governance, it is important that spatial planning, because when we are making cities, we are planning anyways. Now those things has to be put into place. We have to resolve this issue of basic services, and figure out whether we have to wait till the titling happens and only then the basic services, or we can do it in a different sequencing also. And then how much of the technology can come in aid to figure out these things, that these challenges that we have. I thank all of you for this fantastic and a rich experience and sharing. And there is more to learn, but we would continue our efforts on this. Thanks, Felipe, Jan, Danilo, Hong, Rochelle, and Osman. And thanks, Osman, for jumping in impromptu. So thanks, everyone. I now give it to Shubhagato for his concluding remarks. And I apologize that we have run a bit over time, but that's the way it is. Yeah, over to you, Shubhagato.
Thank you, Aparna, and thanks very much to the panelists, to the participants. We've of course had a very rich discussion. It's kind of shown us that to tackle this edge between formality and informality, especially from the leaving no one behind, as was mentioned earlier, frame. It has multiple dimensions, and those dimensions are all in the gray and the not so gray. So is it that means, and so we do need to think of it bottom up in a much more disaggregated way before we combine it to make policy thrusts or programs around new policies. It was really interesting, this session in particular, the way it tied up with the other 3 policy labs that we had, and gave it a different direction, in the sense that while the first 2 or 3 there seems to be some understanding or some driving forces leading to some action by the national government on 3 fronts. How local governments and communities themselves are solving problems are not being means at the national level, not being as strongly visualized as they could be. So means, as we saw in the first policy lab on policies, that these are pretty geographically specific problems. Today too, the Ludhiana model that was presented in India could be supported in whatever way, but has to be local government driven. And so what would be then the role of national government, and whether uni-scalar models that come up from the national government are adequately flexible to allow for local governments to solve their local rental problems themselves, is a question that I'll leave this leave as concluding remarks. But I really want to thank everybody involved. We've especially all the panelists who have joined us for the 4 labs, for all the organizing committee, the 7 institutions that have worked so much in partnership. It surely is a very happy day for us, because when we started this, we did commit to ourselves that we will do these 4 labs before the end of the year, and here we are today. So we are delighted that we've managed to go through. We've actually seen cases from more than 20 countries over these 4 short webinars. They've, as Aparna said, they've given us a flavor of how different places are tackling these challenging problems, which are localized but also generalizable. Means all I would like to say in conclusion is that please do watch this space. There are means while we take on new agendas together as an organizing committee, we've kind of very interested to take this forward, and we will be doing that. We might even come up with some a larger concluding discussion around rental housing and what it means for India from the lessons we've learned. But please do watch this space, and thank you so much. Have a good evening and have a good day from to everyone in Latin America. Goodbye then.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Let's take a
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. My video works now.
Better late than never.
Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Gracias, Julio.